The warning had been clear enough. Azrael was a water world, 99% ocean, where even the scattered land masses were little more than rocky outcroppings or the roots of enormous trees breaking the surface. The Galactic Federation's briefing had labeled it a death trap for any civilization that required fire, metallurgy, or solid ground to function. Yet as the egg-shaped shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Aaron Tavel found himself gripping the edges of his seat, his slender core-high limbs trembling despite his best efforts to appear calm. "You're worrying too much," Carlos Ramirez said, flashing a grin that seemed far too relaxed for someone about to land on a planet that had already claimed 3 diplomatic missions. The human representative stretched in his seat, arms crossing behind his head. "Think about it, Aaron. My species evolved swimming. We're practically made for this place." Aaron's four-fingered hand adjusted his universal translator, making sure the connection was secure. "The previous teams were equally confident," he reminded Carlos. "The Abyssals showed no interest in Federation technology, no use for a fire-based manufacturing or metal tools. How do we convince a civilization that has no needs we can fulfill?" Carlos shrugged, his casual demeanor at odds with Aaron's rigid posture. "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe instead of asking how we can help them, we should ask what we can learn from them." The shuttle pierced the cloud layer, revealing an endless expanse of crystalline blue. Here and there, massive tree-like structures rose from the depths, their pale trunks crowned with tangles of colorful vines and luminescent fungi. Schools of fish darted beneath the surface, some glowing with their own light, others refracting the sunlight into rainbow patterns. As they approached the designated landing zone, a platform of interwoven roots that jutted just above the waterline, Aaron's breathing quickened. On his homeworld of Core, water was precious, contained in deep underground reservoirs. This vastness, this endless blue that stretched to every horizon, triggered something primal in his nervous system. The shuttle touched down with a gentle bump, and the door hissed open. The smell hit them first, salt and life, and something else, something alien that Aaron couldn't quite identify. Cool air rushed in, carrying the sound of gentle waves lapping against the platform. "Here goes nothing," Carlos said, stepping toward the door. He paused, noticing Aaron's hesitation. "Hey, we've got breathing apparatus if you need it. The water's not going anywhere, you know." Aaron straightened his environmental suit, checking the seals twice before following Carlos onto the platform. The surface was surprisingly stable, the interwoven roots forming a dense mat that barely swayed under their weight. Water lapped at the edges, crystal clear and inviting despite Aaron's instinctive fear. Movement caught his eye, and he froze. Rising from the water, not 10 meters away, were 2 figures unlike anything in the Federation database. Their skin was a pale blue-green, their movements fluid and graceful. Gills fluttered on either side of their necks, and webbing connected their elongated fingers and toes. They wore no clothing in the traditional sense, but their bodies were adorned with intricate patterns of bioluminescent tattoos that pulsed slowly with their heartbeats. The taller one spoke first, its voice carrying an odd resonance that the translator struggled to capture. "Welcome to Azrael. I am Ahar. This is Ziri." He gestured to his companion, a gesture that somehow conveyed both greeting and mild curiosity. "You're the 4th delegation to arrive here. The others all returned to their stars, unchanged." Aaron stepped forward, activating his diplomatic protocols. His legs, designed for his homeworld's harsher gravity, struggled slightly with the different conditions. "I am Aaron Tavel, representative of the Galactic Federation. We come to offer friendship and technological advancement to your people." Ahar's head tilted, an expression that might have been amusement playing across his features. "Technology?" He clicked softly, a sound that might have been laughter. "We have no need for hot-burning things. The water provides all." Carlos had been studying their surroundings, and now he spoke up. "Your environment is fascinating. How do you grow food without soil? How do you preserve knowledge without writing materials that would degrade in water?" Ziri's eyes, large and dark as the depths, focused on Carlos with interest. You ask better questions than most skywalkers. Come, we will show you our ways. As they were led along a pathway of floating platforms connected by bioluminescent vines, Aaron struggled with each step. The constant sound of water, the slight sway of their pathway, the knowledge that beneath them lay fathoms of dark unknown, all combined to set his nerves on edge. Carlos, by contrast, seemed to grow more animated with each step, peering over the edges to watch the marine life below. Look at those. Carlos pointed to a school of fish that resembled living prisms, their scales breaking the sunlight into spectacular displays. Do they actually refract light for camouflage, or is it a mating display? Ahar paused, clearly surprised by the humans' genuine interest. They're songfish. They use the light patterns to communicate across great distances. Would you like to hear? Without waiting for an answer, Ahar produced a series of clicks and whistles from his throat. The fish responded, their scales shifting through a complex sequence of colors while producing tones that bordered on musical. Incredible, Carlos breathed. The acoustics alone. You waste time on creatures of little consequence. Aaron interrupted, his anxiety making him sharper than intended. We have technologies that could revolutionize your civilization. Metallurgy, energy generation, space travel. Surely you must desire advancement. The moment the words left his translator, Aaron knew he had made a mistake. Ahar's expression, previously open and curious, turned reserved. Ziri made a sound like water trickling through pebbles, which the translator unhelpfully labeled as disapproval. Advancement toward what? Ahar asked, his tone carefully neutral. We have sustained our civilization for millennia. We harvest the ocean's bounty, maintain the balance of life, and explore the depths that even we have not fully fathomed. What need have we for stars when our own world holds infinite mysteries? Carlos shot Aaron a warning glance before stepping in. I think my colleague means no offense. We're just excited to share the wonders we've discovered. But you're right, every world has its own path to wisdom. They continued their tour, visiting what the Abyssals called water farms, where they cultivated various species of seaweed, shellfish, and other marine life in carefully balanced ecosystems. Aaron had to admit, grudgingly, that their aquaculture was remarkably sophisticated. How do you regulate nutrients without industrial fertilizers? Carlos asked, genuinely fascinated. Ziri gestured to a complex web of tubes and channels woven between the floating platforms. We redirect thermal vents, mix waters of different depths, introduce specific microorganisms. Balance, not force, is our way. Aaron found himself trailing behind, his environmental suit growing heavier with each step. The constant presence of water, the alien beauty of the place, the casual dismissal of everything the Federation offered, all of it was undermining his confidence in their mission. I need a moment, he announced abruptly, finding a wider section of platform to steady himself. Carlos frowned but nodded. Of course. I'll continue the tour, if that's all right. Aaron waved him on, trying to ignore the look of concern in his human colleague's eyes. As the others moved ahead, he sank to his knees, trying to calm his breathing. The water here was clear enough that he could see down several meters, where more exotic life forms drifted past. A creature resembling a transparent jellyfish pulsed by, its organs visible through its crystalline skin. They do not understand, a voice said beside him. Aaron looked up to find Ahar had returned. Your dry ones, they see our world and see death. But we see life in its purest form. I apologize for my earlier words, Aaron managed. In my culture, we measure progress by our ability to change our environment. Ahar settled down beside him, his movements graceful despite the lack of solid ground. And if the environment is already perfect, what then is progress? The question struck Aaron with unexpected force. He had never considered that advancement might have different meanings for different species. Before he could respond, a commotion came from ahead on the path. Carlos was laughing, a genuine sound of delight, while Ziri and several other Abyssals who had appeared watched with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. I want to try, Carlos was saying. He had kicked off his boots and was rolling up his pants, ready to wade into the shallower sections of water. "Carlos," Aaron called out, rising quickly. "The mission protocols." But Carlos was already stepping into the water, letting out a whoop as it reached his shins. "God, it's perfect. Like the Caribbean, but clearer." The Abyssals watched with interest as Carlos took tentative steps deeper, clearly testing the currents and bottom conditions. Aaron noticed how they perked up at his obvious comfort in their environment, how their previous reticence was replaced by curiosity. "Your companions showed no such ease," Ahar commented. "They remained sealed in their bubbles of air, touching our world as little as possible." "Perhaps that was their mistake," Aaron admitted quietly, watching as Carlos dove under the surface for a few seconds before emerging with an exclamation of joy. "A moment's question. If we were to bring technology that could integrate with your way of life rather than replace it, would you be more receptive?" Ahar considered this. "Perhaps. But words are wind. Actions are the current that shapes the world." Carlos was now attempting to mimic the swimming style of some local fish, creating more splashes than grace, but earning genuine amusement from their hosts. Despite himself, Aaron felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was another way to approach this mission after all. As the twin moons began to rise over the horizon, casting their pale light across the endless ocean, Aaron realized that today was only the beginning. The question remained, could they find a bridge between worlds so different? And more troubling still, would his own fears prevent him from crossing it? "You brought it, didn't you?" Carlos asked as they returned to their shuttle that evening. "The underwater capability for your suit?" Aaron hesitated at the airlock. "Yes, but—" "No buts tomorrow," Carlos said firmly. "Tomorrow we try again. And this time we both get wet." The shuttle door closed behind them, sealing out the sound of waves. But in Aaron's mind, the endless blue horizon remained, waiting. The next morning brought what the Abyssals called first light, a phenomenon where the twin moons aligned to create a prismatic effect through the atmosphere. The water surface transformed into a mirror of dancing colors, a sight that made even Aaron pause in wonder. "Today, we invite you to our deeper gardens," Ziri announced as they gathered on the platform. She indicated a section of water where the bottom fell away into deeper blue. Most Skywalkers refused this honor. Aaron's throat tightened, but Carlos was already sealing his lightweight diving gear. "We'd be honored," the human replied. "Aaron." Every instinct screamed at Aaron to refuse, to maintain his distance from the alien depths. But he could see the test in the abyssal size, the way they watched to see if he would retreat like the others before him. More than pride was at stake here. The mission itself hung in the balance. "I'm ready," he said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. The modified environmental suit felt alien as it adjusted for water pressure, its transparent sections suddenly far too revealing of the depths below. The Abyssals slipped into the water with barely a ripple. Carlos followed with something resembling grace, despite his bulkier equipment. Aaron approached the edge as if it were a precipice, every step careful and measured. "Just remember," Carlos said, treading water nearby, "it's just like the training simulations, except more beautiful." Aaron closed his eyes, reciting the breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. "The water is not death," he whispered in his native tongue. "I am greater than my fear." With deliberate slowness, he lowered one foot into the crystalline blue. The initial contact sent a shiver through his entire body, but the suit's temperature regulation kicked in, normalizing the sensation. He lowered his other foot, then allowed himself to sink slowly until the water reached his waist. His breathing was shallow and rapid, but he was in. He was actually in. "You're doing great," Carlos encouraged. Now comes the fun part. Through their transparent face masks, Aaron could see his hosts swimming in complex patterns around them. They moved with impossible grace, their bodies undulating like marine creatures. Even Carlos, with his human-designed aquatic adaptations, moved more freely than seemed possible with such primitive equipment. Ziri gestured for them to follow, swimming toward what appeared to be a cultivated garden growing in the water column itself. Structures of coral and what looked like flowering sea plants created three-dimensional landscapes, each hosting different species in careful balance. Despite his fear, Aaron's scientific curiosity began to stir. The agricultural sophistication was undeniable. Without tools they consider basic, the Abyssals had engineered complex ecosystems that produced food, materials, and even what appeared to be medicinal compounds. Observe, Ahar indicated, pointing to a particular species of plant that seemed to pulse with internal light. When young ones are learning, they tend one of these for a full cycle. It teaches patience, observation, understanding of balance. Carlos was already studying the plant intently. What happens if you try to force its growth? Have you experimented with accelerated cultivation? Ahar's response carried that sound of amusement again. Force brings imbalance. Imbalance brings collapse. This is a lesson your predecessors never learned. What if, Carlos mused, we could offer technology that helps observe these balances more precisely? Not to change them, but to understand them better. The question hung in the water between them as their hosts considered. Aaron realized Carlos had done in moments what he'd failed to achieve in entire meetings, presented technology as a tool for understanding rather than transformation. A commotion from above interrupted their discussion. Another group of Abyssals had arrived, and Aaron could sense a certain tension in their bearing. One, distinguished by more elaborate bioluminescent patterns, approached Ahar with urgency. Hunters have tracked a GRAOL into the garden boundaries, the newcomer reported. It threatens the young growth in the eastern section. Graul. Carlos perked up. What's a GRAOL? Ziri's answer came with what might have been excitement. Our largest predator. Magnificent hunters, but they must be kept from our gardens, or they will upset years of careful cultivation. Can we help? Carlos asked eagerly. Aaron was about to object when he saw the expressions on their hosts' faces. This was another test, perhaps an even greater one than swimming in their waters. Skywalkers do not hunt the GRAOL, Ahar stated. It requires understanding of currents, of the creature's behavior, of precise communication and coordination. Then teach us, Carlos challenged. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Ahar made a decision. Observe only. Do not interfere. They swam together toward the edge of the garden where the cultivated area gave way to deeper, wilder waters. Aaron tried to keep up, fighting against his growing anxiety as the bottom dropped away beneath them. They were in open ocean now, and anything could be beneath them in that dark blue void. There, Ziri pointed. Through the clear water, Aaron spotted movement that made his heart skip. A creature emerged from the gloom below, serpentine but massive, easily 20 meters long. For eyes glowed with bioluminescence, and its body rippled with muscular power as it investigated the boundary of the cultivated zone. A team of abyssal hunters formed a loose circle around the creature, communicating with complex sounds that traveled through the water. Their movements were coordinated, almost like a dance, as they encouraged the GRAOL to change direction. Incredible, Carlos breathed. They're not attacking it, they're guiding it. Aaron watched, fascinated despite his fear. The hunters maintained perfect distance, using sound, movement, and what appeared to be mild bioelectropulses to redirect the massive predator without conflict. It was a ballet of understanding between hunter and hunted, where the goal wasn't death but cooperative coexistence. The GRAOL, perhaps recognizing the gentle persuasion, turned gracefully and glided back toward deeper waters. The hunters followed at a respectful distance, making sure it left the garden's vicinity. You have much to learn from them, Ahar noted, and Aaron wasn't sure if he was being addressed to the Federation delegation or himself. As they swam back to the surfaces, Aaron found himself replaying the scene. Everything the Abyssals did seemed to be about balance and understanding, not domination or transformation. It was a philosophy so alien to Federation thinking that he struggled to grasp it. Back on the platform, as they removed their diving equipment, Carlos couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Aaron, did you see that? The sophistication of their understanding of marine biology. I saw, Aaron admitted. But how do we document this for the Federation? How do we explain that advancement might look completely different for an aquatic species? Maybe that's the point, Carlos suggested. Maybe the Federation needs to expand its definition of civilization. Ziri approached them with what passed for hospitality among her people. You are invited to the deep feast tonight. It is an honor we extend rarely to skywalkers. Deep feast? Aaron asked warily. A celebration held in the twilight depths, where the ancient ones dwell, Ahar explained. It requires extended submersion, precise breathing control, and respect for the darkness. Aaron felt his anxiety surge again. A celebration in the depths, where light didn't reach naturally. He'd already pushed himself to limits he'd never imagined. Surely this was too much. We accept with gratitude, Carlos responded before Aaron could object. As sunset approached, Aaron found himself once again questioning his partner's boundless confidence. The dive would be deeper than anything they'd attempted, the environment more challenging, the stakes higher. If they refused, they might damage the fragile trust they'd begun to build. If they accepted and failed, they might endanger themselves and their mission. You fear too much, Carlos observed as they prepared. That's good. It means you understand the magnitude of what we're attempting. But don't let fear determine our path forward. And if we fail, if I panic in the depths, then we fail together, Carlos replied. Simply, but we try first. The Abyssals provided modified breathing apparatus, organic technology that interfaced directly with their guests' respiratory systems. As Aaron attached the device, which resembled a translucent jellyfish, he felt it pulse gently against his mouth and nose, adapting to his physiology. Trust the gifted breath, Ziri instructed. It knows the depths as we do. The descent began as day faded to night. Bioluminescence took over from sunlight, and the water became a constellation of living stars. Fish with lantern-like appendages glided past, jellyfish pulsed with internal light, and larger shapes moved in the periphery of vision. As they sank deeper, Aaron's suit registered the increasing pressure. The modified apparatus worked flawlessly, extracting oxygen from the water while removing waste products. Still, the darkness grew more profound with each meter, and with it, his old fears. At perhaps 50 meters, they reached their destination, a vast amphitheater carved by nature into the side of an underwater cliff. Hundreds of abyssals gathered here, their bioluminescent patterns creating a shifting tapestry of light against the dark water. Welcome to where the old songs still echo, Ahar gestured grandly. Here, we remember what the depths have taught us through countless generations. The gathering began with individual abyssals contributing bursts of light in complex patterns. Aaron realized with wonder that this was music translated to a visual medium, a symphony of light that told stories and preserved history. Your turn will come, Ziri said quietly. All guests contribute to the feast. The declaration sent a spike of anxiety through Aaron. We have no light patterns, he protested. We cannot participate in such a ritual. Perhaps not traditionally, Carlos mused, but we have other lights. He activated his suit's external beacon, creating a steady glow. Aaron, adjust your suit lights to pulse with your heartbeat. You can't be serious. The Federation protocols. Hang the protocols. We're guests at their feast. We should offer what we can. Reluctantly, Aaron made the adjustment. Soon, both humans had their suit lights pulsing in rhythm with their vital signs. It wasn't the sophisticated patterns of their hosts, but it was participation. The Abyssals noticed immediately. Several approached, intrigued by these skywalkers who attempted to speak in light. Ahar swam closer, examining the effect. Crude, yes, but it shows willingness to understand our ways. As the feast continued, Aaron found himself relaxing slightly. The darkness that had seemed so threatening now felt protective, a blanket that revealed beauty accessible only to those willing to look beyond obvious sight. The community aspect of the gathering began to make sense. In the depths, they needed each other for safety, for companionship, for the continuation of their culture. A A shift in the water signaled a significant moment. The eldest of the abyssals moved to the center of the gathered, his ancient form bearing historical patterns that glowed dimly with age. He made a complex series of movements and sounds, each clearly carrying weight of tradition. He speaks of the first contact with Skywalkers, Ziri translated, of how each delegation claimed to offer gifts, but refused to accept the greater gift, understanding. The elder continued, his words carrying through the water with perfect clarity. Aaron listened as the translator converted the ancient language, learning of past encounters that had all followed the same pattern. Skywalkers arrived with technology, the abyssals offered wisdom, and both departed essentially unchanged. Tonight, the elder concluded, we see something different. Skywalkers who attempt our lights, who descend to our depths, who ask questions without demanding answers. The significance wasn't lost on either of them. This feast wasn't just a social gathering. It was a judgment, an evaluation of their worth as potential allies. As if on cue, the largest sea creature Aaron had ever witnessed glided into view. The GRAL from earlier had returned, drawn perhaps by the gathering or simply passing through its territory. This time, however, there was no team of hunters to redirect it. Should we withdraw? Aaron asked nervously. No, Ahar responded. GRAL know the deep feast. They respect our gathering. Watch. The massive predator circled the amphitheater, its 4 eyes studying the gathering. Then, in what could only be described as a greeting, it flashed its own patterns of bioluminescence before continuing on its way. They teach us that even giants must respect community, Ziri explained. It is a lesson some civilizations never learn. The pointed reference was clear, and Aaron felt the weight of the Federation's own tendency toward dominance. How often had they arrived at primitive worlds with the assumption that their way was the only path to advancement? The feast concluded with a sharing of food, though the abyssals were thoughtful enough to provide items suitable for their guests' different digestive systems. As they swam back toward the surface in their shuttle, Aaron found himself exhausted but strangely at peace. I understand now, he confessed to Carlos as they prepared to rest for the night. The Federation measures progress by changing things. They measure it by understanding things first. And where does that leave our mission? Carlos asked. Changed, Aaron admitted. We can't offer them what they already have perfected, but perhaps we can offer to learn from them, to document their wisdom for the rest of the galaxy. Carlos nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like a true diplomat. But as Aaron drifted asleep, he wondered if the change he'd experienced was reversible. Could he return to the Federation with their rigid definitions of progress intact? Or had the depths of Azrael taught him something that would forever alter his perspective? The answer, like the ocean itself, remained vast and uncertain. But fate had deeper waters to plumb before their mission's end. The next morning brought significant changes. As dawn light filtered through the atmospheric layers that made Azrael's seas gleam with prismatic colors, Aaron noticed differences in their hosts. More abyssals had gathered, their bioluminescent patterns clearly indicating discussion or debate. Ahar approached them on the platform with an unusual formality. The Council of Depths has agreed to hear your full proposal. This is unprecedented for Skywalkers who have not survived the deepest swim. The deepest swim, Aaron repeated, his voice careful. A traditional test, Ziri explained, where one must navigate the depths of contemplation alone, facing both the environment and oneself. Carlos's excitement was immediate. What would this involve? A descent to where light never reaches, Ahar responded gravely. You would carry an ancestral light stone and must return it to the surface without technological assistance. Many of our own young do not complete it. Aaron felt his carefully constructed confidence crumbling. Everything they'd done so far had been with safety equipment, with their suits, with some level of technological support. This would strip all that away. It's suicide, he protested. We're not built for such depths without protection. Yet you asked to be our partners, Ahar pointed out gently. Partnership requires understanding. Understanding requires experience. The debate that followed between the two Federation delegates was heated. Carlos argued that accepting the challenge might be their only chance to bridge the gap between their peoples. Aaron countered that it could mean their deaths, and worse, could be seen as the Federation's tacit approval of dangerous first contact protocols. "You've been swimming more confidently," Carlos observed during a break in their argument. "You faced your fears and grown from it. This is just the next step." "This is a leap, not a step," Aaron retorted. "We have responsibilities to the Federation, to our families, to continue our lives and our work." "And what if this is the work?" Carlos challenged. "What if, for once, we have a chance to do diplomacy the right way, by truly understanding another culture instead of imposing our own?" Their debate continued through the evening, watched with interest by their hosts. The Abyssals made no attempt to pressure either of them, understanding that this decision had to come from within. It was Ziri who finally offered a compromise. The deepest swim need not be alone. In ancient times, siblings would sometimes attempt it together, though never with Skywalkers. Perhaps the Council would accept a shared journey. "You mean we could both go?" Carlos asked eagerly. "With one light stone between you," Ahar confirmed. "It would still be historic, but perhaps less absolute." Aaron found himself caught between his fears and his growing understanding of what this meant. The Abyssals weren't asking them to prove superiority or domination. They were asking for proof of sincerity, of willingness to understand on a fundamental level. "I need time to consider," Aaron said finally. That night, he walked the edges of their platform alone, listening to the endless song of the waves. The twin moons hung low on the horizon, their reflection creating a silver road across the dark water. He thought about his life before this mission, the safety of his climate-controlled office on Kor, the predictability of diplomatic protocols, the comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. But he also thought about what he'd discovered here. The depth of wisdom in these primitive beings, the way they developed sophistication without destroying their environment, the community bonds that allowed them to thrive in what others saw as a hostile world. "Still fighting? With yourself?" Carlos's voice came from behind him. "Tell me," Aaron said without turning. "How can you be so certain? How do you face each challenge without hesitation?" Carlos moved to stand beside him. "Who says I don't hesitate? I'm terrified every time." But Earth used to have a saying, "Ships are safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for." "We're not ships," Aaron pointed out. "No, we're diplomats. And diplomacy isn't safe either." Morning brought their decision, or rather, Carlos's decision with Aaron's reluctant agreement. They would attempt the deepest swim together, accepting this as the ultimate test of their commitment to true understanding between their peoples. The preparation was extensive. The organic breathing apparatus they'd used before would not function at the pressures they'd encounter. Instead, the Abyssals provided something they called depth blessing, a ritual treatment that temporarily modified their guests' cellular structure to better handle extreme conditions. The biochemical process was fascinating, terrifying, and completely beyond Federation medical understanding. "How long does the modification last?" Aaron asked as the gelatinous substance was applied to his skin. "Long enough," Ahar responded cryptically. "The depths have their own timing." They were given minimal equipment, simple fins appropriate for their non-native limbs, and a single light stone, a crystal that glowed with stored sunlight, steadily dimming as it discharged its energy. The stone would guide their descent and measure their time. If it went dark before their return, they would be lost in eternal night. "Remember," Ziri instructed as they prepared, "the deepest swim is as much about confronting yourself as the environment." Many fail not because the depths defeat them, but because they defeat themselves. As they stood at the edge of the platform, two abyssal young ones in training gathered to observe. Apparently, their attempt would be recorded in their culture's memory, regardless of the outcome. "Ready?" Carlos asked, though his hand trembled slightly as he held his portion of the light stone's bearer chain. "No," Aaron admitted honestly. "But let's go anyway." The descent began gradually. They'd practiced diving, but never to the depths they'd encounter now. The light stone glowed warmly between them as they sank through layers of ocean life. Schools of fish parted around them, some pausing to investigate these unusual visitors. The water grew cooler, and their modified bodies adjusted automatically. At 50 meters, they passed the depth of the feast from the previous night. At 100, the last traces of surface dwellers disappeared. The stone's light became their only reliable illumination, though occasional bursts of bioluminescence from the creatures below reminded them they weren't alone. 20 minutes into the descent, at roughly 150 meters, reality set in. The pressure was immense, and even with their modifications, both could feel it. Aaron found himself hyperventilating, burning through oxygen faster than the depth blessing could compensate. Carlos noticed and gripped his arm. Even without words, the message was clear: breathe slowly, conserve, trust the process. Together, they continued down. At 200 meters, they encountered their first significant life forms at this depth. Vast jellyfish, meters across, pulsed slowly through the water. Bioluminescent patterns on their bells created ghostly cathedrals of light that appeared and disappeared like visions. Aaron found himself entranced despite his fear. This was a world that no Federation vessel had ever captured properly. Their sensors could map, but they could never convey the ethereal beauty of it all. The stone in their shared grip was noticeably dimmer now. Time was passing, and they hadn't yet reached whatever destination would mark the completion of their swim. A current caught them unexpectedly at 250 meters, pushing them sideways. For a moment, panic threatened as they tumbled through the dark water. But Carlos maintained his grip on both the light stone and Aaron, letting the current carry them until it abated. When they stabilized, they found themselves in sight of something extraordinary, a vast underwater canyon, its walls lined with glowing organisms that created a living galaxy in the depths. And there, at the canyon's entrance, rested a massive stone structure that was clearly not natural, their destination. As they approached, details became clear. The structure was ancient, carved from what might have been an immense coral formation and shaped into a circular gate. Symbols covered its surface, similar to the bioluminescent patterns of the abyssals, but static, permanent, carved in stone. This is it. Carlos gestured toward the gate. Reaching it meant success, but passing through it meant they needed to turn back immediately, as their light stone was now alarmingly dim. They swam through the ancient portal, feeling its significance even if they couldn't fully understand it. This place had tested generations of abyssals, and now it had tested them. The return journey was where the real challenge began. With their light stone fading faster than anticipated, they had to navigate purely by their internal sense of direction and the dim glow of distant life forms. The depth blessing was also beginning to wear off, making their ascent increasingly uncomfortable. At 180 meters on their return, disaster struck. A massive shape loomed out of the darkness. Not the graceful JRAOL they'd encountered before, but something far more primitive and predatory. The translation algorithms in their equipment couldn't identify it, and their hosts hadn't warned them of such creatures. The predator, easily 15 meters of muscle and teeth, circled them once. Its multiple eyes reflected their fading light, studying these intruders. Carlos grabbed Aaron's arm and pointed upward. Flight was their only option. They swam harder than ever before, racing against both the creature and their failing light. The ascent, which should have been gradual to avoid decompression issues, became a desperate retreat. Their bodies, already stressed by the depths, protested violently. Behind them, they could sense rather than see the predator following, perhaps confused by their rapid vertical movement rather than lateral. But at 140 meters, their light stone finally died. Total darkness enveloped them. Even the bioluminescence that had accompanied them seemed to retreat at this particular depth. Aaron felt terror wash over him in waves. Every childhood nightmare about endless darkness, about drowning, about being lost in an alien environment crashed into his consciousness. Carlos's hand found his in the dark, squeezing once firmly. The message was clear: Panic equals death. They had to maintain orientation and continue ascending, even blind. Aaron closed his eyes, though it made no difference to the darkness around them. He focused on his internal sense of up and down, on the fading effects of the depth blessing that told him which way lighter was. Carlos seemed to be doing the same, their movements slowly synchronizing in the dark. Then Carlos did something remarkable. He began to hum. The sound, strange and distorted by the breathing apparatus and water pressure, nevertheless carried. More than that, it reflected slightly off distant objects and creatures. Crude echolocation, but it was something. Aaron joined in, and together they created a sonic map of their surroundings as they ascended. Gradually, the depth pressure lessened. At around 100 meters, the first rays of surface light began to penetrate, and bioluminescent creatures reappeared. Their light stone might be dead, but they were alive. They breached the surface at precisely the location they'd started from, dozens of abyssals waiting to witness their emergence. As soon as their heads broke the water, support surrounded them, removing their apparatus and helping them onto the platform. The depth blessing's effects needed to be nullified with a countertreatment, a process that took several hours. During this time, Aaron lay in recovery, reflecting on everything he'd experienced. "You survived," Ahar stated when they were finally able to move freely. "More than survived, you adapted. At depth, alone in darkness, you found new ways to see." "We almost died," Aaron pointed out weakly. "Yes," Ahar agreed. "That is why it is a test. Real growth requires real risk." Evening shadows lengthened as they gathered for what would be called the emergence celebration. The entire abyssal colony attended, recognizing that something unprecedented had occurred. Not only had Skywalkers attempted the deepest swim, they had completed it through cooperation and adaptation. "The Council has reached a decision," Ahar announced. "We will consider technological exchange, but only on new terms. No uplift as your Federation practices. Instead, we propose cross-pollination. We share our deep wisdom, you share your star wisdom. Both remain who they are, both grow from the exchange." Carlos grinned wearily. That might actually be a harder sell to the Federation than complete success would have been. "Then perhaps," Ziri suggested, "your Federation also needs to learn to swim in new waters." As the twin moons rose again, casting their ethereal light across the endless ocean, Aaron found himself pondering the larger implications. Would the Federation accept this new model of cultural exchange? Would the Council of Worlds recognize that progress need not always follow a single path? "Whatever happens," Carlos mused beside him, "we'll have changed the conversation." "If they believe us," Aaron countered. "They'll have no choice," Carlos assured him, "because we'll have evidence they can't ignore." That evidence came in the form of their own transformations. The deepest swim hadn't just tested them. It had fundamentally altered their understanding of what diplomacy could be. They weren't returning as simple observers who saw an interesting culture. They were returning as beings who had touched something profound in the depths of an alien world. As their shuttle prepared for departure the next morning, the farewell carried Sector, Aaron Tavel, Carlos Ramirez. The voice, when processed through their translators, belonged to Ahar. "The Council of Depths has asked me to convey additional information." Carlos fumbled to activate the response channel. "Ahar, this is Carlos. How did you?" "Your Federation's quantum network was not as secure as you believed," Ahar responded with what might have been amusement. "We have been aware of it for some time. We chose not to engage with your communications because we had nothing to discuss. Now that we do, the revelation that the Abyssals had been monitoring and could apparently access supposedly secure Federation networks added another layer to their report. These were not primitive beings blind to the wider galaxy. They had simply chosen their level of engagement deliberately. "What information did you wish to share?" Aaron asked, his mind already racing with the implications. "We have discussed your words about Deathtrap worlds," Ahar continued. "This category in your Federation databases. We propose a counter-survey. Send us coordinates of 10 systems your explorers deem most lethal to life. We will evaluate them properly. The audacity of the suggestion made Carlos laugh out loud. You want to grade our death trap classifications? Perspective is everything, Ahar replied. What your people see as hostile, we may see as nurturing. What you fear as limitation, we may recognize as opportunity. Your Federation could learn much by consulting those who thrive where you see only death. After the transmission ended, the two diplomats sat in stunned silence. The Abyssals weren't just offering an exchange of knowledge. They were offering to become consultants on potentially habitable worlds that the Federation had written off completely. This changes everything, Aaron said finally. If they're right about even a fraction of misclassified worlds, the Federation's expansion plans would need complete revision, Carlos finished. Entire departments would need to be restructured. They added this development to their growing report, knowing it would cause waves throughout the bureaucratic system. But the truth couldn't be hidden. The Abyssals had challenged not just their diplomatic methods, but their most fundamental understanding of habitability. As their ship approached the core systems, they received clearance for priority docking at Federation headquarters. Apparently, their mission status had already generated significant interest. 3 failed diplomatic attempts, followed by an extended mission, had raised questions at the highest levels. The debriefing room was packed with officials from across species barriers. The Federation Council had arranged for real-time translation matrices to ensure nothing was lost in communication. As Aaron and Carlos presented their findings, they watched the assembled beings react to each revelation. When they reached the part about their deepest swim, sharing the biometric data that proved their physical transformation, murmurs filled the chamber. When they demonstrated the echolocation technique they developed in absolute darkness, several aquatic species present expressed clear approval. Dr. LTHYSS, the Aquarius Council member whose species native to Europa's subsurface ocean, was among the most vocal supporters. These findings align with our own cultural understanding, she stated. We too were initially categorized as too primitive for Federation standards because we refused to abandon our aquatic cities for surface colonies. The opposition came primarily from representatives of desert worlds and those who had invested heavily in terraforming technologies. Admiral Korth, whose species had spent generations adapting airless moons through atmosphere processors, argued vehemently against any policy changes. Are we to abandon our own progress because some beings prefer to remain in what we scientifically define as more primitive conditions? He demanded. The Federation's strength lies in our ability to standardize development across member worlds. It was Carlos who responded, his human passion barely contained. The Federation's strength should lie in our diversity of approaches. When we met the Abyssals, they had already developed solutions to problems we didn't know existed. They have technologies we don't recognize as technology because they're biological rather than mechanical. By your standards, a beehive isn't architecture, but it shows engineering sophistication. The debate raged for hours. Aaron found himself drawing on the patience he'd learned in the depths, presenting data methodically while Carlos provided the passionate counterpoints to traditional thinking. Finally, the decisive moment came when they activated the quantum communicator and, with permission from the Council, initiated contact with Azrael. The image that appeared on the holographic display showed Ahar in what appeared to be an underwater amphitheater, surrounded by flowing waters and bioluminescent life. Greetings, Federation Council. Ahar spoke clearly through the translator. We understand you debate our proposal. Dr. LTHYSS spoke first. We are honored by your direct participation. The Council has concerns about integrating non-standard development metrics into our evaluation systems. Standards exist to serve understanding, not to limit it, Ahar responded. Your representative, Aaron Tavel, initially feared water as death. Through experience, he learned it could mean life. Systems, too, can learn to see beyond initial programming. Admiral Korth interjected, but how do we measure progress if every civilization defines it differently? Perhaps, Ahar suggested, progress is best measured by how well a civilization maintains balance with itself with its environment, and with others. By this measure, a world that destroys its oceans to create land might be less advanced than one that learns to live harmoniously with water. The holographic image shifted to show the underwater gardens they had visited, the careful balance of ecosystems, the integration of life forms that the Federation's censors had initially dismissed as random collection of species. "We have survived 10,000 of your rotations," Ahar continued. "Our population is stable, our environment is healthy, our culture is preserved. By whose standards are we primitive?" The question hung in the air as the transmission ended. In the following weeks, as the council debated and committees formed to study the implications, Aaron and Carlos found themselves at the center of a philosophical revolution in Federation thinking. The change, when it came, was gradual but significant. The Azrael protocols were established, creating new guidelines for first contact that prioritized understanding over intervention. Classifications of worlds were updated to include alternative development track, rather than simply primitive or unfit for habitation. But the deeper change was in the Federation's exploratory mindset. Ships began carrying specialists in aquatic environments when investigating water worlds. Training programs included modules on non-traditional technology recognition. Most importantly, the concept of cultural depth, understanding a civilization required willingness to immerse oneself completely, became part of standard diplomatic education. Months later, Aaron and Carlos found themselves assigned to establish the Federation's first Deep Understanding Center, a facility designed to train diplomats in immersive cultural experience. The center's location was highly debated until the Abyssals made a surprising offer. "Build it here," Ahar suggested during one of their now regular communications. "Let your diplomats learn where land meets sea, where two worlds naturally bridge. We will teach them to swim in more than water." The proposal was revolutionary. Never before had a Federation facility been built on a non-member world. But the precedent the Abyssals had set for cultural exchange made it almost inevitable. A year after their first descent into Azrael's depths, Aaron and Carlos stood once again on a platform above those endless blue waters. This time, they weren't alone. The first class of Deep Understanding trainees, 6 beings from different Federation worlds, waited nervously beside them. "Remember," Aaron told the group, his voice carrying the authority of experience, "the greatest barrier to understanding isn't physical, it's in our own minds." Carlos grinned at the assembled trainees. "Also, don't fight the currents. Learn from them." As they led the new students toward their first encounter with the deepest swim, both former diplomats reflected on how their own currents had changed. They were no longer representatives of a system seeking to impose order. They had become bridges, conducting the energy of understanding between shores. The Abyssals had been right about one thing. Deathtrap was merely a failure of imagination. Once they learned to see with new eyes, learned to breathe with different lungs, learned to find light in the darkest depths, what seemed like a hostile environment revealed itself as merely a different kind of home. And in learning to swim in alien waters, the Federation was slowly learning to navigate the far more complex depths of true interstellar cooperation, not through domination or standardization, but through the recognition that the universe was vast enough to contain infinite variations of success. As the twin moons rose again over Azrael, their combined light painted the waves in colors that had no names in Federation languages. Somewhere in those depths, new students were taking their first tentative strokes into understanding. And somewhere in the vast spaces between stars, the Federation was learning, one planet at a time, that the greatest adventures began not with conquest, but with the courage to let oneself be changed. The waters of Azrael, ancient and patient, continued their eternal cycle. But now they carried new stories, new possibilities, and the promise that sometimes the most profound transformations came from learning to see the beauty in what others called a death trap. And indeed, whenever diplomats gathered to discuss challenging missions, They would share the tale of the day humans went swimming and taught the galaxy that the difference between death and life sometimes lay not in the environment, but in the willingness to adapt, to understand, and to surrender to a deeper current of interstellar wisdom. In the depths of understanding, they had found perhaps the most precious resource in the entire galaxy. The humility to know that their way might not be the only way, and that true progress might sometimes require taking a leap into the darkest waters, trusting that on the other side lay not death, but transformation.